In this presentation, I will give you an overview of 4708, Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine. So, I'll talk to you a little bit about the course, what prerequisites are, the difference between semester and H units, because there's a number of those that actually make up our Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine. So, to give you a quick overview of the program, it is a 4-year-long program. It's full-time only, that's what we say. There are a couple of students that may be in a position, depending on what units they've completed, to take a part-time loading. It does extend the length of the course, of course. There are 1,000 clinical hours of practice that actually are necessary in order to graduate from the Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine. So that's all tied into the tutorials, the practicals, the clinical placements that actually make up the podiatry specific units in our program. Per semester, the course rules state that you complete a maximum of 40 credit points. It's not really possible to do more than 40 credit points per semester. There are some unusual circumstances where it does happen, but they have to be very, very specific circumstances. So, what does the whole 40 credit points per semester actually mean? Well, what that actually means is there are 4 units you complete each of the semesters, each of the H sessions. Each one of those units is worth 10 credit points, with the exception of podiatry clinical block, which is in your 4th year. That's a 20 credit point unit. And what 10 credit points means is that 10 hours a week are expected to be devoted to study in that unit. That's inclusive of face-to-face teaching and also the self-directed study assignments you're expected to do. So, to give you an example, Introduction to Podiatry has a 2-hour lecture and a 2-hour practical session and a 1-hour tutorial session. So that adds up to 5 hours of face-to-face teaching per week, but because Introduction to Podiatry is a 10 credit point unit, that means 5 hours of your own independent study. So you add all that up, and what you've got per semester is 40 hours a week of study, including face-to-face teaching. So you can probably appreciate that to add on an extra unit is pretty much impossible in most circumstances. Right, so what you'll see directly in front of you is an outline of, well, a course plan, a map of all the units that make up our program year by year. We'll go on to talk, in a little bit more detail about the individual years and what's actually involved. But then what you'll notice underneath is that some of those units in emboldened text have got PR. PR stands for prerequisite. What that means is, in order to enroll in a unit concerned, so let's just say for instance Pathophysiology 1, 400138, you must have successfully completed Human Anatomy and Physiology 1, but also Human Anatomy and Physiology 2. So you can't actually enroll in Pathophysiology 1 unless you've successfully completed both those units. And this is why remaining as focused as possible in your study, making sure you successfully complete units is so important, because then what happens is we end up with a circumstance where a student's progression is directly affected, and then the student has to come to me and we have to talk about a progression plan, an alternative route of progression, taking into account the units that haven't been successfully completed, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. Where possible, I do my very best to try to minimize the impact that unsuccessfully completing a unit has on your progression. But often what happens is you add an extra year onto your progression, because these units, particularly the podiatry specific units, are only really offered in 1 session per year, and so you've got to wait for that opportunity to come around. And you can see that a lot of the units, particularly podiatry specific units, have a lot of prerequisites, and so if you were to say, for instance, fail one podiatry specific unit, it has this domino effect on the successive years, which ultimately means you are at high risk of adding an extra year onto your progression. Now, because of the strictly sequenced program that the Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine actually is, there are also lots of implications and challenges for internal transfer students. You know, those that are changing programs within the university, as well as those that are coming from other programs at other universities. We refer to those as external transfer students, because with all these different prerequisites that we got in place, even if a student has a lot of the different core units, if you just look at the relationship between the podiatry-specific units, so intro to path mechanics and podiatric medicine, onto musculoskeletal disorders and imaging, onto podiatry preclinical, what you see is that even if you have the bulk of core units as an internal transfer student or an external transfer student, it really does nothing to accelerate your progress through this program. And so there are circumstances where I've got students that you have only a part-time loading for 1 year or 2 years, and there's nothing we can do about that, because with the rules as they are, we can't actually sequence podiatry units in year 1 together with podiatry units in year 2 and so forth. Now, and I've actually done a separate presentation on this for you, as well as these prerequisites, you know, which you're required to have in order to enroll in units. There are also special requirements and something called bulk compliance that we need to be very mindful of. So we say by the end of autumn, H1, in year 2, all students must have gotten the special requirements in place. So I talk about this in a separate presentation, but that includes your vaccinations, working with children check, criminal records check, also your first aid with Oxyviva resuscitation and EpiPen component, and then on top of that you need to assign the student undertaking. So if you don't have those in place, by the time you get to the end of your autumn H1 session in year 2, you will not be able to enroll in podiatry preclinical. And it applies to all your other clinical specific, podiatry clinical specific, so like your PodPrac units, like PodPrac 1, PodPrac 2. Those special requirements need to be in place. You need to have not only gotten those special requirements, but gone to Student Central, which is Building 5, and actually handed them in so they can attach them to your student records. You know, there have been circumstances in the past where students have not had those special requirements in place, and they've added on an extra year to the progression because they've not been able to enroll in these podiatry-specific units that have a clinical component. They have to be in place. But then, once you've got your special requirements in place and successfully enrolled in the unit, it does not end there. You also need to make sure that you are bulk compliant, which is where you have submitted your vaccination records card and also your criminal records check to the actual health service. So bulk compliance, the appointments, they're actually organised by our bulk compliance officer. We also have compliance day on the university where we try to process all the students en masse, so someone will come out from New South Wales Health Work Services and actually process you all together. But if you don't actually achieve that, then our compliance officer has the job of organising an appointment for you to go to a local hospital, perhaps Liverpool Hospital, where you go and do your bulk compliance check. And that's not, just to stress, that is not something you try to organise for yourself. Okay. One more thing to actually point out to you is that a lot of the units are sessional units, semester units, but a lot of the units are also H units. So your sessional units are your semester units. So you have your autumn session units, you have your spring session units. But then the great majority of the podiatry specific units, so they're the ones that are highlighted in a darker red colour on the map in front of you. The great majority of those units are H units. What that means is half year units. So half year is divided into 1H or H1 and H2. So this is highly significant in year 2, year 3, year 4. What that means is that those units, they can start earlier, they can finish later, so they can fall over those over the half year of the calendar. So, for instance, our 1H unit PodPrac 1 actually started shortly after the 4th of January this year. Because of this, you need to be extremely careful when you're in this program with regards to booking holidays. So you do get some time, where you can have, there is a bit of time off, but, a couple of weeks, a few weeks. But look, in theory, what this means is that you can't just go booking holidays assuming that everything in the podiatry program is going to follow your autumn and spring semester. It's really not the case with the Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine. So what you need to do is speak to the unit coordinators, speak to me, speak to our DAP, Debbie Turner, if you are planning holidays, to see if we can actually negotiate something. Don't go ahead and do it assuming that everything will run like an autumn and spring semester. It won't, and that is entirely your responsibility. Alright, so I've got some dates here for you to take a look at. So these are your semester units and H units and how they start in 2016. If you're a first year and you've just started a Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine 2016, don't worry, you won't have any H units in the first year. You will from the second year, so from 2017 you will. But this is just really to give you an indication of just how the dates are very different. So let's just compare the autumn semester dates with your H1 unit semester dates. So with your autumn semester, with your introduction to podiatry, your first week of autumn semester will be beginning on the 22nd of February. Semester units are 18 weeks long. That includes your intra-semester break and also the 2 weeks after week 14, 4 weeks after week 14, where you actually have your examinations and everything's finalized. So you have about 13 weeks of teaching, face-to-face teaching, in your semester units because of that 1 week inter-semester break. Okay, so there's also some STUVAC dates on there for you. Mid-semester break for your autumn semester is week 8, and STUVAC is for your autumn semester is the 30th of May to the 5th of June. So autumn semester ends the 26th of June and begins the 22nd of February. Okay, but look at the H unit, the H1 unit. It starts so much earlier than an autumn semester. And again, if you look at your spring semester dates, so your spring semester in 2016 commences on the 18th of July, but then look at the start date for any H2 units, which won't apply to students in the first year. It starts on the 27th of June. So your H units can start earlier. A really, really important date to bear in mind is census date. So census date for your autumn semester is March the 31st. That's actually an incredibly important date because that is the date by which all your units must be finalized. Okay, so what that means is before census date, you can drop units if it's necessary, but once you've gone past census date, you can't do anything of the sort, and all payments need to be finalized by census date. Okay, so that's 31st of March for your autumn semester. It is the 31st of August for your spring semester. A really handy link has been provided for you at the bottom left of this particular slide here. That is a link to your academic calendar for 2016. If you ever have any questions about dates, particular weeks, important deadlines for yourself as a student in terms of the administrative side of your enrollment, it's all on your academic calendar. And you can just bring it up on the Western Sydney University website. So the link's there. Okay, so further to actually telling you what semester and H units actually are, okay, so what you've got here, what you can actually see is that the units that are highlighted in a deeper red are your H units. So you've got H1 units and you've got H2 units as well. So your first H1 unit that you'll have to be enrolled in is in your autumn H1 session of year 2, which is Path Mechanics and Podiatric Medicine. And then Musculoskeletal Disorders and Imaging and Podiatry Preclinical are H2 units in your spring H2 semester of year 2. Just to reiterate, because of the H1, H2 nature of our podiatric medicine units, be very, very careful about booking holidays, because, as I have said previously, they can start earlier, they can finish later, and it's your responsibility. So at least speak to me or the unit coordinators for the units concerned if you have to book a holiday, or you want to see if it is possible to book a holiday. Right, something else to actually point out as well is that the lighter coloured units, they are semester units, and I guess what you'll notice is our core units, they run as semester units, and our podiatry specific units run as H units, with the exception of Introduction to Podiatry, of course. Just to point out as well, after 3 years on our program, you can exit with a Bachelor of Health Science. That's happened in a few cases in the past. But you won't be able to practice as a podiatrist. You won't be able to register as a podiatrist with the Australian Health Professions Regulation Agency. That's the Podiatry Board of Australia. And you have to complete the full 4 years to exit with the Bachelor of Podiatric Medicine. Okay, so let's just look at your years just a little bit closer up. Okay, so what we've got then is in year 1, you will complete one podiatry specific unit, that's Introduction to Podiatry, and you have a total of 7 core units if you don't receive advanced standing for any of them. So that includes things like research and evidence-based practice. You learn human anatomy and physiology. You also undertake develop an understanding of functional anatomy, and also develop professional health competencies and skills with communication in health. In year 2, you have 3 podiatry specific units, and also you have 5 core units. Okay, so you have Path Mechanics and Podiatric Medicine in your H1 session of year 2, H2 session of year 2, includes Musculoskeletal Disorders and Imaging, and Podiatry Preclinical. Your other core units include things like clinical pharmacology. I actually build on that with my Pharmacology for Podiatrists unit, Pathophysiology 1, Introduction to Biomechanics, Research Methods, and Neuroanatomy. Now, just be mindful, as I previously said, of the just be really mindful of the prerequisites, because if you start to fail some of these core units, if you complete them unsuccessfully, it has real implications for how you may progress through year 1 and year 2, and there is a significant risk of actually an extra year being added to your progression. Right, and then in year 3 and year 4, you can see that it's in these 2 years where the bulk of the podiatry specific units are. So in year 3, you've only got 3 core units, which includes culture, diversity and health, psychology and health, evidence-based practice. But then you have 5 podiatry specific units, and this is where you really start to get into the craft of podiatry and develop your podiatry specific knowledge, because you have the high risk foot, which is significantly dedicated towards a foot with diabetes. You learn about pharmacology as it relates to the practice of podiatry. You have your podiatric practice units. These are the units where you'll actually be going out on external placements to practice on patients. That might be a rural placement, hospital placements, urban placements. You actually develop the skills in podiatric surgery as well. And then in your final year, you have, it's essentially all dedicated to podiatry. There is one unit which is anything you want to choose. It's an elective unit, so you elect what you want to study from a list of available units. I've actually done a separate presentation on how to choose your elective. That's unless you have been able to apply for advanced standing for it. But you can see here that we have podiatric pediatrics and sports medicine, dermatology and gerontology, podiatric professional practice studies, PodPrac 3 and PodPrac 4. Again, these are units where you're going out on placement. But then you also have this rather substantial 20 credit point unit, which is divided over your H1 and your H2 session called Podiatry Clinical Block. This is where you will go out on a placement for a total of 2 months, working 37.5 hours a week roughly. So these are extended placements when you complete your podiatric clinical block unit, and it's worth 20 credit points. Okay, if you've got any questions about the course, if you want to ask about any aspect of the course in any more detail, you've got questions about advanced standing, if you've got questions about progression plans, any questions in relation to the course, do feel free to get in touch with me. You can do that by telephone, you can send me an email, or you can call by my office, knock on the door, and if I've got the time there and then, I'll see you, or we can arrange an appointment as well. So I'm pretty flexible. Okay, I hope that's given you a relatively clear understanding of the course in general, and if you're thinking about applying for advanced standing, questions about choosing your elective, if you've got further questions about what special requirements and book compliance are, do see the other presentations in this folder, and hopefully they'll answer your question. Alright, thank you for listening.